Welcome to Moments with Marianne. This is your host, Marianne Pastana, and we're here today with special guest, James D. Paulk Jr., who's here to share with us stories from the Naval Academy and beyond. How did a Naval Academy graduate move from submarines and corporate leadership to protecting the oceans and helping change conservation laws? Well, today's guest is here to share with us just that. Born and raised in the small town of Brunswick, Georgia, James D. Paulk Jr. graduated from Glynn Academy, attended the military school North Georgia College, and graduated in the class of 1957 in the United States Naval Academy. He served 5 years on active duty and 5 years in the reserve force as a naval submarine officer. He then went on to a business career of 26 years with Procter and Gamble and worked in manufacturing management before starting a business consulting company with other retirees. After retiring for a second time, he began writing articles for fishing magazines and newspapers. So welcome to the show, James D. Paulk Jr.
Thank you, Marianne, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, my goodness, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you, especially talking about your last book. And I wanted to dive into this one, Swimming for Our Lives. Can you share a little bit about that book with us?
Sure, I'll be happy to. After I retired, a couple of times, I retired from Procter and Gamble, and then I took a retirement, and then I was talked into doing fishing conservation, and I did that for 9 years, pretty much as a volunteer. But I served as president of 501c3, so it was pretty intense work. We did a lot of things with it. We raised fish, working with SeaWorld and a bunch of volunteer organizations to put fish back in the ocean. We built probably the largest artificial reef in the world, 9 miles off of Huntington Beach in about 92 feet of water. And the biggest thing we did was to get pass an initiative to get rid of the gillnets off California waters, and that's probably the most unusual and ambitious thing that I was ever involved in. And I will just mention that I had retired from P&G, and I put together a group to do some projects, more not necessarily for money, but for fun, to do projects together. And we were just getting going. We've been doing some projects, and then this group came to me and said, "We've got this initiative that the Assemblywoman Doris Allen was sponsoring, and we need to get 600,000 signatures in 6 months." And they have started out to do it, and is absolutely failing. So this group went to Doris Allen and said, "We need to get someone with management experience and someone that knows a lot of people in the fishing community, and that's Jim Paulk. So we're going to get Jim Paulk to take." So anyway, they came to me with this proposition. I said, "Look, I'm doing this. I've got this association that I just started, and we're getting doing projects. I got about 20 people." And I said, "I can't just step aside and leave them." But they said, "You have to." So I said, "I'll go back and talk to a group that I've been meeting with called the Gillnet Watch Committee." And there were about 20 in the eclectic group, everything from charter boat skippers to doctors to just fishermen and whatever. And I said, "Look, they want me to do this initiative." I said, "There's no way that I can do it unless I have a committee. And you guys, if you will put your lives on hold for the next 5 months, and we'll bust our rear ends getting signatures, and we'll get this thing on the ballot, and we'll get it passed." And I said, "We have to create the perception of success in order to get money donated so that we can buy signatures as well." And so they said, "Okay." And so I said, "All right, we'll get going." And so we got started on this, and I I could talk for an hour about all the things that we did, but I will tell you that at the very end, in June, we had to get signatures all turned in by that time. And I wanted to make a big splash with the television primarily. And so we did some television roundtable, and I did a lot of radio talk around Los Angeles, San Diego, and Santa Barbara, and wherever about what we were doing. But I said we need to do something across the whole state, and so I had some fishing friends that had a mortuary, and they had a twin-engine airplane, a King Air. And I said, it's a fast airplane. I said, we need to be able to cover the state of California in one day. And they said, okay. He said, I'll fly. And his brother says, I'll be the co-pilot. I said, that's great. It seats about eight or nine people. And so there were only about 4 or 5 of us that could make the trip. So we left Orange County Airport in the dark, and we flew to Sacramento. And when we got to Sacramento, we put on a dog and pony show in the governor's media room, which is like a small auditorium, and it was packed full of people. And the fishing club people up there had put together a good show, and we participated in it with them. When that was completed, we got back on the airplane, and they got lunch for us while to eat on our way down, and we flew down to Burbank to the media center in Burbank. And I mean, there were all kind of TV celebrities there. Ronald Reagan's daughter, what was her name? Patty Duke, is that her name? She was there. There were a lot of really VIPs there. And so when you get VIPs to show up, you get a lot of television, and the television cameras were there and they were rolling. And so we did a big presentation there. Then we got back on the airplane. We flew to San Diego, and the guys down there had lined up a whole bunch of fork trucks, and they had pallet loads of cases of signatures. And they had a parade down the street and went to this and put all these ballots on the steps of the courthouse in San Diego. And then we did a big dog and pony show. And of course, the TV and all the media were there for that event. And when that was over, we flew back to Orange County Airport, and it was dark. So we went dark to dark and covered the state of California, but we got them all turned in. And then the night of the election in November, Bill Ray, who owned the Balboa Bay Club in Newport Beach, hosted the watch party for us. And we had Mickey Mantle was there, Joey Bishop was there. We had a lot of people there. And so about every hour, I'd get up and make an announcement of what the vote was. And at the end of the night, we had won 53 to 47. And so we eliminated the gillnets over a period of 3 years. We phased it out to help the commercial fishermen and phased them out. And at that point, we said, we're going to work with the Hub Sea World Research Institute. And they'd been raising some white sea bass at about 3 or 4 inches and released them into the ocean. But the problem at that size is that everything eats them. And so it's like putting candy in the ocean for the fish. So I had looked at a program that was over in Ventura, and they had tried to raise some salmon in a net. And they got these small ones from the Fish and Game and got them up to about 10 or 12 inches and released them. And then the Fish and Game said, we can't do this anymore because salmon are not indigenous to Southern California. So they shut that program down. But I was very impressed with the net process. And I said, look, if we can take those small fish out of SeaWorld and grow them up to 10 or 12 inches and release them into the ocean, then 75% of them will survive. And so I lined up 13 fishing clubs from Balboa down to San Diego, out to Catalina Island, and we had net programs, and we had Fish and Game. A SeaWorld that delivered fish to us. And we had to build a hatchery. San Diego Gas and Electric Company donated 7.5 acres of land on the lagoon there at Carlsbad, and we raised money to build a hatchery there to raise these fish. And we had always had fish coming out of there. They had raceways where they had adult fish. We went out in boats and caught the mamas and the papas for the hatchery. I organized a bunch of boats to go out and catch these fish, and SeaWorld was there to collect them from us and take them back. And they had 4 tanks, and each tank had a different season of the year. They could regulate the temperature and the light to adjust it to a spawning period. And so when the eggs came out of the tank, they were captured in the net, and then they were put in the small tank, and they would uh, look like wigglers in there, wiggling all around little tiny things. And then eventually got up and they put them in a raceway outside. They had a bunch of raceways, which are maybe 4 feet wide and 25 or 30 feet long. And they got them and they grew them up in there to about 4 inches. And then from there, they loaded them in a tank truck and delivered them to one of the 13 grow out pens. And at that point, volunteers paid for the construction of those grow out pens. They paid for the feed for them, and they volunteered and kept them clean and everything, and tended like they were babies. And then when they got tended well, which they were released. Now that program, this was 30 years ago when we started doing this, probably about mid-90s. Today, 40% of the white sea bass caught in Southern California come from the hatchery program, because each one of these fish that comes out of the program has a coated wire tag that's inserted into the gill plate. So when the heads are turned in by fishermen, they use a magnetic wand to see if the tag is in, the pin is in there. And if it is, then they can read it. And all of that information is collected by Cal State Northridge, which has a marine biology department. And then they do the record keeping and produce the reports. So this program is unbelievable. You've got industry, you've got SeaWorld, you got Fish and Game, and you got volunteers, you got everybody, all government, everybody working together to produce these fish. And it's a remarkable program that's going on right now. But anyway, I did all these things and then I retired. So everybody in the fishing world knew my name at that time. I was pretty known because I was in charge of this program. And so at this point, magazines wanted me to write stories for the magazine. So I was a terrible writer, Marianne. I was really bad. I'm basically an engineer type, wasn't a much writer. So at that point, I started writing on some of our fishing trips my wife and I made, and trips I did with other people, adventure stories and whatever, and they were not very good. And and then there was a lot of talk in Southern California about catching the world record largemouth bass, and they mentioned the name George Perry. And I said, "This is crazy." I knew a George Perry when I was a little boy, and I knew the fish had been caught in 1932. 22 pounds, 4 ounces was a record, and they were going to catch it in one of those lakes in Southern California. And I said, he was the most unusual character I've ever known in my life. And so I called my best friend in South Carolina. I said, Mike, I said, there's all this talk about this George Perry man. Is this sitting the George Perry that we knew when we were kids, is he? He said, yes, it is. I said, I never knew he caught the world record bass. So anyway, I said, I'm going to do a lot of research and put together a big story about George Perry, because the whole fishing world needs to know him. Think of the millions and millions of people around the world that fish for largemouth bass all over the world. It's the biggest thing in fishing, really, because of the competition that's involved. And anyway, I did about 9 months of research and I had stacks of notes. And then I was intimidated. I said, I'm not good enough to write this story. And I said, I should do it. I need to get somebody else. So I called Pete Thomas, who was the outdoor editor for LA Times. And I said, Pete, I said, I got all these notes. How about if I give you these notes and you write this story? And he said, Jimmy, he said, I've been reading some of your stuff and you're getting better. And I said, that isn't much of a vote of confidence. But I said, all right, I will see what I can do. So I couldn't talk anybody else into doing it. So I spread all this stuff out on the dining room table, put them in chronological order, and I started writing. And I wrote this thing out, and I got done. And I handed it to my wife, and I said, Pat, how about reading this and see what you think? So she read it. She turned around. I said, what do you think? She said, it's awful. I said, yeah, I know it's awful, but we can make it better. So we went through about 9 iterations, and eventually that story was published in like 4 magazines and several newspapers and whatever. But after this, during this George Perry thing, I met a man that was the outdoor editor in Augusta, Georgia Chronicle. He'd been there for decades, and we became close friends. And he had written several books, and I was complimenting him on his books. I said, "You have done such a great job." And he said, "Well, Jimmy, you could do a book too." I said, "What do you mean do a book?" I said, "No way I can do a book." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Just take some of your articles and put them together, and that's a book." And I said, "Well, I'll take a look." And so I looked through all my files of copies of these magazines and the stories I've written in there, and I found maybe 4 or 5 that I could maybe work on and make better. The rest of them were all terrible and completely unsuitable for a book. And so he told me that I said, how many do I need? He said, maybe 11 or 12. And I said, okay. So I started working on these, and I came up with about, I think, 20 something stories that I could do. And some of them I had written about, and I wrote about them for the first time. And that was a swimming magazine that I came up with on that one. And I will tell you a couple of stories. One story that this is kind of ridiculous, okay? But there's some of them that are very short, and some of them that are long, and some of them have something, but some of them have very little to them. But we were over at Catalina on our boat, and I had a friend of mine that came over as inflatable. He said, "Jimmy, you want to go around east end of Catalina and see if we can catch some fish?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Well, let me go get my gear, and I'll come back and get you." So he came back, and we took off towards the east end of Catalina. And of course, he's running the motor, and he's looking towards the land, and I'm looking out towards the sea. And I started seeing this thing out in the distance that looked like a seagull, and it started getting closer and closer and closer. And I said, "Gene," I said, "I don't know what that thing is out there, but it's not a seagull, and it's getting closer. What do you think?" And all of a sudden I said, that's one of those, what do you call them? Like a parasail, yeah. But it's got a motor on it. And so he's doing it. And I said, "Gene," I said, "you're getting lower and lower and lower. I think he's going to land in the water." And I said, "We probably ought to go out there and check on him." So we went out there, and this young guy maybe looked like he was about 20 years old. And he's sitting in a chair, and we said, "Hello, how you doing? What are you doing out here?" He said, "Well, I'm a spotter for one of the stick boats. That's the boats that stick broadbill swordfish, and he spots them for them, and then leads the boat to the fish." And he said, he was off a boat that was out of San Diego, and he said, they're about 2 hours out. They're going to come get me, and they'll pick me up and put the boat, put the thing back on the boat. And I said, "It's going to get pretty rough out here. Maybe we ought to. You want us to take you into Catalina and tie you off on a buoy in there where it's a little safer?" He said, "That would be great." I said, "Have you got a rope?" He didn't have a rope. So the dinghy had about a 9 foot painter on the bow, and so we tied that off on a cleat, and we looked like 2 crabs kind of going sideways toward him towards Catalina. So we got him in there, and the harbor patrol met us. We explained the situation, and he tied him off on a buoy to wait for the stick boat to come get him. And I said, "Jane, why don't we go into the pier where they weigh in all the fish, and let's report that we've caught the first airplane of the year." So we went in, and Rosie was the weighmaster there, and Rosie was just the love of our lives. She weighed in the fish when we caught them, and just a delight. So we went in, and we said, "Rosie, we want to report catching the first airplane of the year. And there it is out there on the buoy. And she turned around and she told us what we were full of and to get out of there. So that was just a little fun thing that we put in there. But one that's, I'll tell you another story. Do you know the singing group, the Platters?
I've heard of them, yeah.
They were really, really popular, and I love their music. But Pat and I went to Branson, Missouri, and her roommate and her husband from Houston, and they drove up from Houston in the car and met us there. And so we spent a week, and of course, Pat and I fished half a day, a couple of half a days. We always fish where we went. And we had a wonderful time. And the last day, of course, we was staying at a timeshare, and we had groceries and all stuff left over. And we said, well, the last day there, we would go to an early afternoon show and then go eat dinner and then go back to the room and pack. And then they had to leave the next morning because they had a 2-day trip back to Houston. And we had to drive to Springfield to catch a flight back to LA. So we did that, and we decided to go to a Cracker Barrel for dinner. So we went to Cracker Barrel, had dinner, and when we got done, Nancy and Pat just went around in a little shopping area there, and we went out on back and sat on the porch. And about that time, 2 men came out the door. And I heard one of them say to the other one, let's go over there and play checkers for a little while. And so I looked at them. I said, there's a checkerboard. I got up. I said, there's a checkerboard right here. Here, take my chair. And I said, wait a minute. How can you play? He's got a white cane with a red tip on it. How do you play checkers with somebody that can't see? And so we started going back and forth a little bit. And I noticed he had about a dozen gold chains around his neck. And I had no idea. I was just having fun with him. And so Pat's roommate came out the door, and she saw me interact with these guys. She said, you know who these guys are? I said, I don't have a clue. She said, they're the Platters. I said, oh my goodness, that's one of my favorite singing groups of all times. And then the leader of the group was Rooster, and he was the bass and probably the oldest in the group. And Rooster said, have you been to our show? And I said, no, we haven't been able to get there. We've been to a lot of other shows. He said, you have to come to our show tonight. I said, Rooster, we got to get back to the room and pack. I said, we're both leaving in the morning. And he said, no, you got to come to our show. And so anyway, we finally said, okay, we'll go to your show. So he said, give me 15 minutes. You sit here, wait 15 minutes, and I'll go to Will Call and get your tickets ready. And so you get your tickets at Will Call. So anyway, we waited a few minutes and went back there and made sure that he was clear of Will Call, and we got our tickets. And when you go into one of those theaters in Branson, they see thousands of people. They're huge. And they have ushers that seat people because they can get them seated faster that way. So they are really good about that. And so we got there, and they escorted us all the way down to the very front seat. There was nothing in front of us, just the stage. And so the show was terrific. And near the end of the show, Rooster came down off the stage with 2 long-stemmed red roses, and he gave one to Nancy and he gave one to Pat. And then he danced with Pat in the aisle there. And when it was done with that, went back up on the stage. I found out later they had planned to get me up on the stage and have a little to do up there, or maybe try to get me to sing or something. I don't know. But they had some other people from another show that they had to take up time, and they couldn't do that. But then they announced to the crowd, okay, now after the show, we want all of you to come up front to the lobby, and we'll take pictures and sign autographs. And so the show was over, and I'm looking, and I said, there is no way. I said, it would take an hour with all those people and probably lined up to get autographs and photographs. And I noticed that there was a door over next to the stage that said exit on it. I said, there's nobody over by that door. Let's go out that door. So we went out that door and we got out. Just as we got out the door, there was a sidewalk out there. And who's coming up the sidewalk but Rooster? Rooster said, where are you going? I said, Rooster, we got to go back and pack. We got to get a flight back to LA in the morning. He said, no, no, no. You got to go up and get photographs. And he grabbed Pat by the arm and they went up the sidewalk. And I told John, I said, well, I guess we're going up front. He told us not to worry about any lines or anything. So anyway, that was our platter story. Everybody was attracted to my Pat. She was just unbelievable person. And I could talk for hours about her. But I will just tell you that I always had a girlfriend. I was one of the few guys in my class in high school that had a steady girlfriend. And for my junior and senior year in high school, and before I could even drive, somebody else would have to drive. We'd double date. And I always thought that that would be the girl that I married. But we split up after 2 years. And then I had another girlfriend that was Charlotte O'Hara. She was gorgeous, but she was a handful. And we dated for a while, and she said, and she knew I was trying to get an appointment to go to Annapolis. And she said, I'm not hanging around 4 years for you to graduate from Annapolis. I'm going to Georgia and find me a husband. And I said, okay, all right, that's fair enough. And I later found out, many decades later, I found out she had found about 4 of them. And I said, well, I guess I've dodged a bullet. But anyway, I had a few girlfriends after that, and I had 2 years before I got my appointment to Annapolis. Uh, and my Georgia girlfriend wouldn't come to Annapolis. And of course, I only got to come home for a few days at Christmas time and then 30 days in the summer. And she decided that wasn't much of a relationship. And so she wrote me a Dear John letter. And in Annapolis, we got a Dear John letter. You posted it on a door for everybody to read. So that's therapy, I guess. So a friend said, Jimmy said, I'm going over to Delaware for a 3-day weekend. Would you like to go? I said, I'd love to go. I'd never been to Delaware. So we went to the University of Delaware, and his girlfriend at the time, Sheila Cunningham, fixed me up with 3 blind dates. And I'm sure the first 2 were great. But the third one was Pat. And I met her. I had never met anyone like her in my life. She seemed to have an aura about her that reached out 5 feet. It was most unbelievable. She was the nicest, the most attractive, just everything. It was unbelievable. And I said, wow, maybe that's the girl I want to marry right there. And so I got her phone number and address. And then I tried to get her to come down to Annapolis. And I did not know that she had just broken up with the captain of the Delaware basketball team. And she was not interested in starting another relationship anytime soon. But I finally convinced her to come down for a formal dance. I didn't know at the time, but she absolutely loved to dance. I like to dance too. And so she came down for a weekend. I said, we'll meet on the steps of Bancroft Hall at 2:00 on Saturday afternoon. So at 2:00, I said, I hope I can recognize her. And I hope she's not ugly as sin, because if she is, I'll get the brick on Sunday night. The brick was a big ceremony Sunday night to award to the person that had the ugliest date over the weekend, that some people decided, whatever. It was kind of a fun thing they did. And so I wasn't sure what she's going to look like. And I know she felt the same thing about me, because you got all those thousands of midshipmen. We all look alike in our uniforms. But when I got to the steps of Bancroft Hall, there she was. She had on a sweatshirt that had Delaware right across the front. She made sure that I was going to find her, because she was not going to find me. And we both at that point smiled at each other. And I think our souls met at that point. I don't know. I know I had a dagger in my heart when I met her. She was just unbelievable. And I later found out that she had been the most popular girl on the campus of the University of Delaware. And I know I used to ask her once, I said, Pat, why'd you marry me? I said, I couldn't believe I married somebody like her. It was just amazing, this woman. And she was so tolerant of me. She knew I was a fisherman, and she knew that was a passion in my life. And she knew that that was all to be tugging at my strings. But she was okay with that. I told her that, hey, a friend asked me if I would take a trailer boat from Huntington Beach down to Cabo San Lucas for a month next year, and we're going to plan to go. And she said, okay. I said, we're going to leave the 22nd of October, and we'll be home just before Thanksgiving. Now, and most women are going to bonkers over there, not going to agree to something like that, but she was fine with it. And I said, we have, this was a 26-foot trailer boat, and we were going by water. So this was an adventure. And but we rented a satellite telephone so that we could call every night and tell where we were. We called the builder of the boat, who lived on a 60-foot boat, and so we called him at 8 o'clock every night to tell him where we were and that we were safe. And then he could contact our wives. And anyway, that was an amazing trip. And we went down by water, and then we paid somebody to come down by highway with the trailer and haul us home. It was 4 days on the highway to get home from Cabo, but we had a wonderful trip. And but Pat was tolerant of that. I had another trip of 9 days. It's in the book. Both of these stories are in the book. A 9 day trip from uh, from Orange County, California, down to Magdalene, not Mag Bay, but Gonzaga Bay, which is 120 miles south of where the paved road ends. It's a dirt road for 120 miles and over a mountain. And so a friend said we go down there and we catch these big white sea bass. And so one of the guys had a VW bus that we could use, and which was a big mistake. That was a huge mistake on that trip, because we had four grown men, and it only had a seat behind the steering wheel, and then we had just a lawn chair next to him, and then the other two sat on the floor in the back of the bus, and we had a tent, and we had to carry 5 gallon jugs of water, 5 gallon jugs of gasoline. We had to carry everything we were going to use for 9 days. So we were loaded down. So before we got to the border, there was a bit of a hill, and the wind was blowing, and the bus was slowing down. It did not have enough horsepower, and we went slower and slower and slower. But eventually, we stopped at a restaurant right at the border and had our last major meal for 9 days, and went across the border and went south. And when we got to the end of the paved road, we had 60 miles to a little village called Portecitos, and it was a small settlement with just a few families that lived there in RVs or manufactured homes, but it wasn't a very big community. And we had traveled, and we were so tired when we got there. We just got out on the ground and slept right on the ground. It was just, we hadn't slept for hours. And so the next morning we got up and we headed south. And when we got to the mountains, the bus was stalled out. And so we had to three of us got out, and we would push it until we could get it going, and we put a rock under the wheel. And we took all of the containers of gasoline and water and everything out of it at the bottom, and we pushed this thing to get it up the mountain, and then we would go back down and get everything. Well, we got about halfway up the mountain. It was really very steep, and it was a hill on one side and a high uphill on one side, and then a drop off cliff on the other side, and it was curved. And so at one point when we were pushing it and he got going, it stalled out before we could get a rock under the wheel, and he went flying down the mountain backwards in his bus. And we went running after him. We thought he was going to go over the cliff and he'd be dead. But he kind of bumped into a rock down at the bottom, and a big rock, and it stopped him. And fortunately, it was on the left-hand side and not on the cliff side. And he got down there, and of course, his hands were frozen to the steering wheel because he was such shock. He thought he was going to be dead. So then we decided that what had happened is we had lost a copper tube, and it had a hole in it from the cylinder and one of the wheels, and so we couldn't find. There were about 20 wrecked cars down below in the cliff. We went down there, and they were all American cars, and of course the Volkswagen was metric, so we couldn't find anything. We finally found a bolt in the steering column that we could put into that one wheel and block that off, and we added brake fluid, and we had brakes on 3 wheels instead of 4. And then we got busy pushing that thing up the mountain. And by the time we got to the top and hauling everything up and down that mountain, it's a wonder one of us did not have a heart attack. And when we got to the top, there was this little I don't know what you call it, a scene that like an arch with some statues in it, and there were coins and stuff. And so we put some coins there to pay tribute for saving us off that mountain. And the only thing we had that day was a few beers. And if we hadn't have a beer, we would have died. So we finally got down to Gonzaga Bay, and we fished for several days. And about the 3rd day we were there, Papa Fernandez, who had created this fish camp there, and the cabins were all made out of just plywood. So if it rained, the water just came straight in. But Papa said that there was a front end of a Volkswagen buried out there on the beach. So one day when we came back in from fishing, we got sticks, and we went out there poking in the sand looking for the front end of the Volkswagen. And we found it. We dug it up, and there was a copper tube on it. We took that off and put that in the wheel to replace the one that had been cut through, and we had brakes on all 4 wheels. So that was kind of an adventure, and in this book, and it's a detailed story of all the things that went in catching fish and getting shrimp off the shrimp boat and then coming back. I mean, we got back to the border. We hadn't shaved, brushed our teeth, bathed, anything for 9 days. So we were pretty scuffy looking bunch. So we got to the border. The harbor patrol looked at us, and he said, "I want you to take everything out of the bus because I need to examine it." And we had rolled up some fish in the tent and had them on ice. And we said, "Oh man, if we have to take those out of there, we're going to lose all our fish." And we started talking to him, and we said, we're managers at Procter and Gamble. We've been doing this. And finally, he started laughing at it. He said, "You guys get out of here." So he let us go. And we made it home in the middle of the night. It was just it was a wonderful trip and a lot of fun. And we had several emergencies along the way. And our main mechanic there was with us. He saved our rear ends more than once. But that was a fun story in swimming. I'd say one of the best ones. And I like the one with the platters. But I will tell you my love story. When I met Pat over at the University of Delaware, she was the most incredible person I'd ever met. I didn't even understand what I was feeling or what I was seeing when I met her, because she was so extraordinary. And anyway, we dated for 2.5 years at the academy, and we got married the day after graduation in Swarthmore, Pennsylvania. And a lot of my classmates that were heading north stopped off there for the bachelor party. That was graduation night, and we all got had drank too much, and it was pretty wild. You did after the dress rehearsal and all of that. Then we went back, and Pat's family had arranged a house for all of us to stay in, and we must have had 20, 25 guys, and they people sleeping on the floor and the couches and on the sofas or double up in beds wherever they could find a place. And then the next day, I never would have made the wedding ceremony if it was in the morning, but it was at 2 o'clock afternoon, and the owners came home in the morning and saw what condition we were in, and she said, "I'll fix you up," and she fixed the breakfast and got us all going again, so we'd be ready for the ceremony at 2 o'clock on in that afternoon. But being married to Pat was most amazing experience. We were married for 60 years, and I lost her 9 years ago. And she had the last few years of life, she had a lot of back trouble. And I had known when I met her that she was also an athlete. And at one point in California, she'd been out of high school 25 years or so, and she was at a meeting, and I got a phone call. And he said, "We want Pat to come back to Pennsylvania for a reunion." I said, "Well, I don't know. It's a long way, and I wish you make it or not, but I can get her to call you when she gets home." And we talked a little bit, and he said, "By the way, tell her that her high jump record is still good." Imagine that. That
Oh
was
my goodness. After all that time.
I never knew she did the high jump. I knew she did the triple jump, the long jump, and I knew she ran the 440. They called it then. It's the 400. They call it now. I knew she did that. I knew she ran, but her main sport was swimming, and her swim coach when she was growing up, the neighborhood, was a man by the name of Peter Dalen. Peter Dalen, and you can Google him and see what you see. Peter Dalen came back from World War II, and the soldiers had the GI Bill, and so he was at Swarthmore College and coaching the swim team at the neighborhood while he was there. When he got, and he was, her brother was on an AAU team there that set a AAU record. So he was some kind of a coach. So when he was done there, he went to Yale as assistant swim coach, and then from there he went to the University of Southern California to be the head swim coach there. Peter Dalen coached the men's Olympic team at the Olympics when Mark Spitz won the 7 gold medals. He was the coach. A few years later, he coached the women's Olympic team. This man was an incredible swimming coach, but he was Pat's coach. But she not only did swimming, but she did diving and gymnastics as well. And I think part of her back trouble was she told me that one time she was doing a back dive from the high board and she hit the lower board. So I think that's one of the things that really messed up her back, which was not manifested until later in life. But what she had planned to do in life is she had planned to teach and coach kids. That was what she wanted to do. And then she met this guy from Annapolis that changed her whole life. So I think I messed up her whole life. But we had a wonderful life together, and we did so much, and we had great kids, and we have wonderful grandkids, and now I'm enjoying the great grandkids. But that's kind of some stories from the swimming book.
Oh my goodness. Well, and I always love watching your fishing that you do on Friday and seeing what you catch. So that hasn't changed. So,
No, I still do that. can't get any boats anymore. I had an inshore boat when we first got to Georgia. We lived in California for 37 years. And so almost my entire family moved back to Georgia. We moved back, our kids moved back and brought the grandkids back. And our three granddaughters graduated from high school here in Georgia. They both came back as either a sophomore or a junior. Our oldest granddaughter was a soccer player. And in fact, she played on the U.S. team when she was in middle school. We went to Australia and New Zealand and played a tournament back there. And then she played varsity soccer in college. She got a scholarship, and the man she's married to was a running back in college. Can you imagine how athletic that little girl is? It's 3 years old. She's unbelievable.
Oh
I
my
said,
goodness.
I don't know what she's going to do, but I told my granddaughter, I said, you need to. What happened was my two of my granddaughters lost their father. He was a Lutheran minister, and he had a brain tumor, and he died when he was like 42 years old. And so our daughter and the two girls lived with us for about 2.5 years, and we kind of bonded at that time. And I took them to singing lessons, dance lessons, soccer practice, games, and everything, whatever they did. And the number one granddaughter was so athletic. I had told her, I said, you need to be exposed to every sport because I need to try out everything to see what you really want to do. And she was playing soccer from the time she was 5 years old. But we had a friend whose son was a semi-pro tennis player, and he gave her tennis lessons. He said, "Oh my goodness!" He said, "She's unbelievable." He said, "You let me work with her, she'll be Jennifer Capriati in no time at all because she's got talent, got so much natural talent." But she didn't want to do that. We did it for a while, and then I took to SCATS, which is the Southern California athletic team, and that's where I think one or two of the girls for the Olympic team trained there in Southern California. And those girls there, they would march from one piece of equipment to another with the music going, and they had a gallery where you could sit upstairs. It was just like a mini Olympic events when they practiced. And one day there, I was sitting up in the gallery, and a coach came up there, and he said, "Are you with Jennifer?" I said, "Yes, she's my granddaughter." He said, "I just want to tell you, she did something today that I've never even seen a boy do." And I said, "What's that?" He said, I told them that they were to jump up on the horse and land on their stomach, then pull themselves up. She jumped up and landed on her feet. And I said, "I can't believe that." But she had very powerful legs. And she did train there for a while. And then that wasn't it. So one Christmas, I bought her 6 golf lessons for Meadowlark Golf Course. That's where Tiger, if you remember, Tiger Woods started at Meadowlark when he was a little boy. And so she had about 3 lessons, and she said, "Pop, I don't want to do this anymore." I said, "Okay, but you know what it's like." But I exposed her to all these different things because she had so much athletic ability. I didn't want her to get locked into something just without looking at everything else. And so I've told her that she needs to do the same thing with her daughter, our great granddaughter, because she's very athletic, and let her decide what she wants to do when she grows up. But that's kind of our legacy, our family legacy, and I'm very proud of them. But when we got back here, I got an 18-foot boat to do just fishing in the creeks and rivers here, and then when I had some some uh, some physical problems, and then I had a fall. I could not get in a boat anymore. But I also had a little 11-foot boat that I had at the pond where I'm fishing on Fridays now. And so I would take everybody out. I took the admiral from the base. I took the football coach. I took everybody bass fishing, took the girls bass fishing. Anybody would get in the boat, I'd take them bass fishing. And they said they'd never caught a bass in their life. I said, "Well, you're going to catch bass with me today, and I'm going to show you how." And so then I couldn't get in boats anymore. And so I gave the small boat to my nephew who had a son. And I said, you can take your son bass fishing. And then I gave the 18-foot boat to my son for him to use. And so then I went through a period of years where I just didn't have any way of fishing. And then when Rachel came aboard, my caregiver, she was able to drive me over the pond, and she is the voice you hear on the tape on Fishing Fridays. It's Rachel, and she is so good. She's a nurse, and she's just a terrific care person, and she spends half her time on the computer working on my books and things. And I don't I could she just created a new life for me. So I'm able to get 2 hours of fishing in a week, which is great respite for me. And but that's kind of where I am right now with the swimming book. If you want me to talk about the book that I've got at the publishers, I could tell you a couple of stories from that.
I would love that. Can you share a couple stories with us? You have such great stories.
Okay, I will. Let me see. I will pick one out here. I got a list. I have told these stories before, so you may have to yell at me or something. Here's one called "Baby in the Basket." Now, the name of this book is "How I Found Love," and after doing two books, I decided that there's nothing more important in life than relationships. And of course, the ultimate relationship is love, but there are a lot of different kinds of love. And I decided that I really wanted to explore love and relationships and do a book on those things. Relationships meant so much to me, and I just feel like there's that by myself I never accomplished anything in life. It was always with other people and other people that I admired so much. And like Pat, I admired her so much, and she was so accomplished, and she was always president of every organization, not because she wanted to be, but because they asked her to be. And at one point, she was president of the Hunting Beach Fountain Valley Board of Realtors, which is 2,500 realtors. And of course, she was on the state board and she was on the national board of realtors. So she could have run for president. I was telling you, but she had no interest in politics. But she could have run for anything and won because that's the way she was. But anyway, Baby in a Basket is a different kind of love, and the person that wrote it, and I'll talk about him at the end, used the word agape, which is a Greek word for love, but it's love that's going one way. It's love that's given with nothing expected in return. That it's all caring, it's all tending, it's all giving, and that's agape. And he wrote a paragraph describing agape and what happened. Well, it starts in a hospital, and a woman's having a baby, and the doctor and the nurse are helping her uh, have the baby. And when the baby is born, the doctor says it's stillborn. Put it on the table over there. So she picks up the baby and puts it on a table. And the doctor says, "Get over here and help me. I've got to help keep this woman alive." And they worked for 2 hours on the mother, and she eventually died. And so the nurse named Ann went over to the table, and she turned around to the doctor. She said, "Doctor, this baby's alive." And the doctor said, "There's no way. He's 2 months preemie. His lungs aren't developed. There's no way he's gonna make it." And he said, "You go home. I'll take care of the baby." She knew he meant by taking care of the baby, he was going to dispose of that baby. And she said, "No." She said, "I'm taking this baby home." The doctor said, "You can't do that." She says, "I'm doing it." So she took the baby in her arms with a blanket and went out the door and went home. She lived in a small bungalow with a father and a sister. Sister was named Sarah. And they got home with this baby. They had a potbelly wood burning stove in the middle of the living room. That's the only heat. And it was very chilly. It was springtime, but it was in Pine Mountain, Georgia, in a little town called Manchester. So it was in the foothills. So it was kind of cold. And so they put the baby in a tomato basket with a handle on it, wrapped in a blanket, and they put it next to this stove to keep the baby warm. And the two of them did shifts. They fed that baby every 2 hours with an eyedropper, okay? An eyedropper for 2 hours, every 2 hours, day and night for 6 weeks, nursing that baby. And it didn't die, it lived. And so at 6 weeks, the sister of the birth mother that had died came to pick up the baby and took the baby from Manchester to Brunswick, Georgia, which is a coastal town halfway between Savannah and Jacksonville, and took that baby home. She and her husband had been unable to have children. And you have to understand that this was in 1933 in the depths of the Depression. Times were really hard. And so you had two angels that were spending all of their time taking care of the baby. And then you had the other family that took this baby and took on that responsibility and raised that child. And their name was Douglas. And the baby's name was Bob Douglas. And Bobby Douglas was a high school classmate of mine and a very good friend. And he is 92 years old now. And his wife, he and Patsy, I see them, they live about 100 miles away, and they come over once in a while for lunch. And I enjoy their company, but he's a really good friend. But he got out of high school and went into the Navy for 4 years as a submariner in New London, Connecticut, and then came back and went to work and he had a very successful life. But he calls Sarah and Ann his angels. There were two people that absolutely saved his life. And if that is a story of that's a powerful love story. And I think I'm going to always love telling that story because it's so significant and it's kind of rare, don't you think?
I do. I do. And I'm so grateful that you shared that with us. I mean, it really touches the heart. I mean, what a profound story.
Yeah, I think it's unbelievable. I mean, there's no incubator, nothing, no technology. And the only thing that doctor had was a stethoscope, right? I mean, that was the only tool he had. But he thought that baby was dead. And those two women, basically, I guess you could almost say they brought him back from the dead. And I just love the story. And Bobby is such a great guy and a great friend. And he is so grateful. And you know what he told me? He said, I am so glad that you told me to write this story. He said, this story has been aching at my heart for over 80 years. And he says, I finally got it out and on paper. So it was a
Wow.
big deal for him to do this story. So I'm so happy about that.
Well, James, my goodness, you're such an inspiration. I love your stories, and I can't wait for your next book to be out. And we're definitely going to have a talk about that. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoy it, and thank you for following me. And I like talking with you online too.
I'm so glad that we get to talk. I mean, you're always such an inspiration. You have so many wonderful stories. I'm so glad that you wanted to take the time and share them again today. So I just wanted to thank
Uh,
you.
I enjoyed it, and I look forward to coming back and we'll talk some more about love stories.
Well, we're at the end of our time today. I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Mary Ann, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Mary Ann is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Mary Ann will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmaryann.com for more information.